They still tell it in hushed tones, as if the desert itself remembers every hoofbeat, every cry, every ounce of greed that soaked into the dust that day. The lone prospector had no name in the tale, only a silhouette on the horizon, hunched over his mule, with saddlebags that clinked faintly with the promise of fortune. The late afternoon sun blazed down, painting the canyons in hues of copper and blood. His face was lined, his beard crusted with grit, and yet in his eyes burned the fever of men who had struck something rare. Gold. Enough to weigh his mule down and enough to invite death to ride close behind. The trail narrowed into a winding pass, cliffs rising like jagged teeth on either side. Silence held for a moment, only the scrape of hooves on rock and the occasional rattle of the prospector's canteen. Then came the sound, laughter. Cruel, sharp, echoing against stone like coyotes mocking a dying calf. Shadows shifted on the ledges above, figures peeling away from the rock face as if the canyon itself spat them out. One rider dropped onto the trail before him, a grin splitting his face, yellow teeth flashing. Another appeared behind, rifle loose in his hands. Soon, the narrow path was crowded with them, half a dozen rough men, their eyes gleaming with hunger not for food, but for the gleam of gold. The prospector froze, mule shuffling nervously, its ears twitching at the sudden tension in the air. His hand hovered near the side of his saddle, not for a weapon, he carried none worth speaking of, but for the thought of reaching his pickaxe. Foolish thought. Before he could act, the leader of the gang spurred his horse forward, a broad-shouldered brute with a scar running from brow to jaw. His voice carried the certainty of a man who had stripped more than one soul bare in his life. "Evening, old-timer. You look weighed down. Why don't we help lighten your load?" The prospector swallowed hard, his throat dry as sand. "It's all I got, all I dug from the earth with my own hands. You don't need it." The gang erupted in laughter. It was not the laughter of men amused but of hyenas circling, already tasting the kill. One of them dismounted, swaggering up with spurs jangling, and yanked open the nearest saddlebag. The gold dust shimmered, catching the light like captured fire. Greed flashed in their eyes, and the air grew heavier, charged with the inevitability of violence. "Mercy's not in our trade," the scarred leader muttered, swinging down from his saddle. His boots hit the ground with a thud that seemed to shake the narrow pass. "Hand it all over, or you won't be riding out of here alive." The prospector's fingers trembled as he clutched the mule's reins. He wanted to run, but the cliffs caged him in. He wanted to fight, but the odds mocked him. When he hesitated, the outlaw closest to him struck with the butt of his rifle, the crack against his temple ringing louder than the canyon silence. He staggered, collapsing into the dust, his vision swimming. He felt their hands clawing at his saddlebags, tearing away everything he had bled and sweated for, every dream of a quiet life far from these sun-bleached bones of a land. The mule brayed in panic as the men ripped it nearly bare, tossing sacks of gold dust and small nuggets between them, laughing, spitting, boasting about the pleasures they'd buy. The prospector's breath came shallow, dust clogging his nose, copper in his mouth from the split in his lip. Above him, boots shifted. He raised his head enough to see one outlaw leaning over, sneering down at him. "Should have stayed in your hole, old man." A kick drove into his ribs, sharp and merciless. Pain radiated through him until he coughed red into the earth. They took turns, some striking him out of cruelty, others ignoring him altogether as if he were already dead. The world swam in and out of focus, the sound of their laughter mixing with the clink of gold spilling into saddle pouches, the snort of horses impatient to be gone. When at last they mounted again, the leader crouched over him one final time. His shadow cut across the prospector's bloodied face. "A mile, maybe less, you'll be buzzard food. But don't fret, your gold's in better hands now." Then the thunder of hooves roared away, the canyon shaking as dust swallowed them up. Their laughter faded, but it lingered, carved into the stone as if it would never leave. The prospector lay broken in the dirt, the mule trembling beside him. His chest rose and fell shallow, pain slicing with every breath. He tried to push himself up, but his arms betrayed him, collapsing under the weight of exhaustion and agony. His mind clawed at fragments of thought, faces long gone, dreams of settling near a quiet stream, the gold his one chance to carve a life out of wilderness. Now it was gone, stolen by men whose names would never be carved on a tombstone. The canyon air grew colder as the sun slipped lower, shadows stretching long and thin. The prospector whispered into the dust, though no one answered. "Not like this." His voice cracked, weaker than the wind scraping through stone. He closed his eyes, But even there the laughter echoed, circling like carrion birds. Somewhere deep inside, a flame of rage flickered, but his body was too frail to feed it. He thought it would gut her out with the last of his breath. He did not yet know that fate had already shifted, that the tale was only beginning, and that beyond the canyon's bend another rider's path was drawing nearer. The desert seemed to pause, holding its breath, as if waiting for the story to unfold. The prospector, sprawled and bleeding in the dust, had been stripped not only of his gold but of dignity, of hope, of the belief that life could still yield mercy. And yet, somewhere in that silence, justice was stirring, unseen but inevitable, as certain as the sun rising again over the endless, unforgiving land. The desert had a way of carrying silence like a burden, pressing it down upon every rock and canyon wall until even the wind seemed reluctant to disturb it. But into that stillness came the slow, steady clop of hooves, the measured gait of a weary horse carrying a raider who did not belong to the world of outlaws and greed. She was a widow by the look of her clothes, plain but sturdy, the dark fabric faded from years under the sun. Her hat brim shadowed her face, but beneath it her eyes burned with a sharpness that belied her quiet form. Folks in the nearby town only knew her as Clara, the woman who had lost her husband to fever and her son to the war, yet carried herself with a strength that no one dared pity. She rode alone often, gathering herbs along creek beds or hunting small game when provisions ran short. Few suspected she carried more than grief in her past. They did not know of the rifle she could load and fire with deadly precision, or the knife at her belt sharpened not only for cutting rope or hide but for defense when the shadows pressed her near. Clara had learned long ago that the frontier showed no mercy. She had buried mercy with her husband, alongside the small wooden cross at the edge of her land. As her mare stepped into the canyon pass, Clara felt the unease immediately. The dust hung heavier here, churned by many hooves not long before. Her gaze swept the cliffs and settled on a dark shape in the road ahead. At first she thought it a carcass, another mule gone lame, abandoned to scavengers, but as she drew closer the shape shifted, coughed, and raised a trembling hand. She swung down from the saddle, boots crunching softly on the gravel. The man was sprawled on his side, his face a mask of blood and dirt. His mule stood nearby, eyes rolling with fear, nearly stripped of its load. Clara crouched, turning the men gently. His breath rattled then in his chest. "Easy now," she murmured, her voice low, steady, the kind of voice meant to hold someone on the edge of slipping away. "You're not gone yet." The prospector's eyes fluttered open, clouded and desperate. His lips cracked as they shaped words. "Gold, they took it, all of it." He tried to rise, but pain seized him, forcing him back into the dust. His hand clutched at Clara's sleeve with surprising strength. "Bandits." Scar on his face, they laughed, mile ahead. Clara pressed her hand over his, firm but gentle, quieting him. "Save your breath. I'll see to you first." She fetched her canteen, tilting it carefully to his lips. He drank greedily, choking on the water but clinging to it as if it were life itself. She tore strips from her shawl, binding the gash on his temple and wrapping his ribs where the bruises blossomed purple. He closed his eyes, whispering still. "Gold's all I had, years in the earth, gone now." A tear traced through the grime on his cheek, and Clara looked away for a moment, for she knew the shape of such loss. She had felt it on a night when fever stole the warmth from the men she loved, leaving her bed cold forever. She had felt it on the morning when a letter arrived with her son's name, and the word fallen printed in a soldier's hand. Her jaw tightened. She stood, gazing down the canyon trail where the dust of the bandits still lingered faintly in the air. The prospector's words echoed, a mile ahead. Men who laughed as they beat him, who robbed him of his hard-won treasure. Men who believed the desert itself would hide their cruelty. Clara returned to her mare, sliding the rifle from its scabbard. She checked the chamber with practiced hands, the click of the mechanism sharp in the hushed air. For a long moment she stared at the weapon, as though it were both burden and salvation. She had promised herself, once, to lay down arms, to let the world spin without her interference. Yet here, the world demanded otherwise. The prospector stirred, whispering again. "They'll kill again, men like that." Clara knelt beside him once more. "Not if I find him first." He tried to grasp her wrist, to hold her back. "Don't, they're many." She pulled free, not unkindly, but with finality. "So was the world, when it took everything from me. I'm still here." Her eyes hardened, and in them flickered the memory of her husband's rifle resting across their cabin door, of nights spent listening to coyotes howl, while she held the weapon close, promising him she'd know how to use it if ever the need came. He had smiled then, proud and teasing, but serious all the same. He had taught her well. Now, that knowledge rose in her like a long-buried river, breaking free. She would not ride past, would not turn away. Justice did not come often to the frontier, but she could deliver a measure of it with her own hands. Not for gold, not for riches, for the simple truth that cruelty unchecked would only breed more cruelty. She mounted again, her silhouette stark against the canyon walls as the sun bled red across the horizon. Behind her, the prospector watched with failing eyes, hope flickering where despair had nearly consumed him. Ahead, the trail bent toward a reckoning. Clara urged her horse forward, each hoofbeat carrying her deeper into the legend she had not sought, but one that had been waiting for her all along. And so the widow rode into the dust, silent as the gathering night, carrying not only a rifle but the weight of every loss she had ever borne. Somewhere ahead, laughter still echoed from men drunk on stolen gold. Soon enough, that laughter would die on their lips. Clara did not ride for riches. She rode for justice, sharp and relentless as the desert wind. The tracks were fresh, pressed deep into the sand where the bandits' horses had thundered past. Clara leaned low in her saddle, eyes scanning the churn of hoofprints and scattered dust. The desert stretched wide and merciless, heat shimmering above the earth like a ghostly veil, but she read the trail with the patience of one who had long lived by signs others overlooked. Each broken branch, each scuff of stone, whispered the same truth: they were close. The sun climbed higher, beating against her shoulders, but Clara pressed on. She passed through stretches of sagebrush, the air heavy with the sharp tang of its leaves, and over dry arroyos where lizards darted for cover at the sound of her mare's steps. Vultures wheeled lazily overhead, drawn by the scent of blood left behind in the canyon. She thought of the prospector, lying broken in the dust, and her resolve hardened like iron. By midday she came upon a watering hole, a shallow pool ringed with cracked earth and a scattering of mesquite. Signs of the bandits were everywhere, hoof marks crowding the edges, a half-burned cigarette stub still smoldering, the print of a boot heel pressed deep into the mud. Clara dismounted, crouching to study the ground. Her fingers brushed the faint impression of a spur rowel, distinctive and sharp. She remembered the prospector's words, scar on his face. The leader, no doubt, the one who had mocked him, had left his mark here as well. She filled her canteen and rose, scanning the horizon. In the distance lay a cluster of buildings, a waystation town, little more than a saloon, a feed store, and a scattering of shacks. Smoke rose from a chimney, curling into the pale sky. Clara urged her mare forward, her shadow long on the trail behind her. The town was quiet when she arrived, the kind of quiet that thickens when fear lives in its people. A few men lingered on the boardwalk, hats pulled low, eyes shifting toward her and then away as though afraid to linger too long on the sight of a stranger armed with a rifle. Inside the saloon, voices hushed when she stepped through the door. Sawdust covered the floor, and the air smelled of stale whiskey and sweat. Behind the bar, the keeper froze with a rag in his hand, his gaze flickering nervously toward a back corner. Clara followed it, but there were no bandits there, only silence. She crossed to the counter, laying 2 coins down with a firm hand. Water. And tell me where they went. The barkeep swallowed, glanced again at the men near the wall, then leaned forward. His voice dropped low. Passed through at dawn. Took supplies, didn't pay. Headed west, toward the ridge. Folks here don't cross them. You'd be wise not to either. Clara lifted the tin cup of water, her eyes steady on his. Wisdom doesn't always keep a body alive. Sometimes it's justice that does. He paled, but said nothing more. Behind her, whispers rippled through the room. The widow, some muttered. A woman chasing killers, others breathed. The weight of their stares pressed against her back as she left the saloon, but no one followed. Fear bound them tighter than chains. Outside, children peered from doorways, their mothers pulling them back quickly, as though Clara carried death in her wake. In their eyes, she read both fear and fragile hope, the yearning that someone might finally stand against the men who had bled this land dry for too long. Clara mounted her mare again, her grip tightening on the reins. Westward the trail wound into Badlands, where red stone towers rose like watchmen and shadows deepened in the narrow passes. Here the bandits had made camp, though Clara did not see them yet. She moved carefully, every sense sharpened, the rifle resting across her lap. The air smelled of smoke, faint but distinct, and carried the echo of laughter, rowdy and careless. The bandits lounged around their fire, the stolen gold piled at their feet in sacks and tins. They drank from bottles, sloshing liquor into their beards, boasting of their triumph, their cruelty. One of them mimicked the prospector's broken pleas, sending the others into howls of mirth. Another threw nuggets into the dirt, daring his companions to scramble after them like dogs. Their voices carried far into the canyon, reckless with the certainty that no one dared follow. From the shadows above, Clara watched. Her eyes were calm, but her breath came slow and steady, measured as if counting heartbeats. She studied them one by one. The scarred leader sprawled arrogantly, a pistol at his side. The younger one with nervous hands, always reaching for his rifle. The brute of a man who laughed louder than the rest, though his eyes were empty as dead coals. Each movement, each weakness, carved itself into her mind. Her mare stamped softly behind her, and Clara reached back to soothe it, her touch sure and practiced. She had tracked men before, not bandits, not killers, but soldiers, once, in a war that had swallowed her boy. She remembered how he had taught her to read signs, to steady her hand, to listen more than she spoke. She remembered, too, the sharp crack of gunfire on distant fields, and how she had sworn to survive it all, no matter the cost. The bandits knew nothing of this. To them, she was only a widow, faceless and harmless, if they thought of her at all. But Clara knew the truth. She carried within her the patience of years spent enduring, the skill of a hunter taught by necessity, and a will forged in grief's unyielding fire. The night deepened, stars scattering across the sky like spilled embers. The bandits sang, their voices rough, slurred with drink. In their arrogance, they believed the desert belonged to them, that no shadow could ever rise against them. But the shadow had already come, silent, watching, biding its moment. Clara withdrew into the dark, leading her horse away from the ridge. Tomorrow would bring the reckoning. Tonight, she let their laughter ring in her ears, memorizing the sound so she could silence it forever. The desert was vast, but vengeance had a way of narrowing the world until only hunter and prey remained. And in that narrowing, Clara felt her purpose sharpen into something unbreakable. The trail behind her stretched empty, but ahead it drew taut, a line pulling her closer to the hour when justice would speak through her steady hands. The widow had become something else now, something the bandits could not yet imagine. And by the time they did, it would be too late. The fire in the hollow burned low, its glow flickering across the greedy faces of men too drunk on gold and whiskey to feel the weight of the night pressing in. They sprawled in careless heaps, boots kicked off, hats tipped back, laughter rolling louder than the crackle of burning wood. Horses tethered nearby shifted uneasily, their instincts sharper than their masters. Clara moved among the rocks above them, her rifle cradled close, her breath measured as though each inhalation was another step carved into destiny. She waited until the scar-faced leader rose, swaggering to the fire with a bottle in one hand and his pistol loose in the other. He poured liquor into the flames, sending sparks leaping skyward, and bellowed, "To the desert that gives, and the fools who dig it up for us." The men roared their approval, slapping each other on the back, spilling drink across their shirts. Clara's eyes narrowed. Their arrogance was a wound ripe for splitting. The first shot came quick and clean. The man with the nervous hands, always twitching toward his rifle, lurched suddenly backward as the crack split the night. His weapon clattered uselessly to the ground, his body folding beside it. For one heartbeat the camp froze, staring into the shadows. Then chaos erupted. "Who's out there?" One shouted, scrambling to his feet. Another dove for his pistol, only for Clara's next shot to snap the weapon from his grasp, splintering his hand and sending him howling into the dust. She was already moving, sliding from rock to rock, the widow no longer a bystander but a force as precise and merciless as the desert wind itself. The scar-faced leader barked orders, dragging men behind cover, but their drunkenness dulled them. Clara used it, waiting until one leaned carelessly from behind a barrel before striking, her bullet dropping him before he hit the ground. Another lunged blindly into the dark, knife raised, but found only her boot as she struck, sending him sprawling. In a flash her knife was at his throat, her whisper colder than the night air. "Stay down." He obeyed, trembling, the laughter long gone from his face. One by one, their numbers thinned, not by wild shooting but by a patience they could not comprehend. Clara's movements were deliberate, every step recalling nights she had trained in secret with her husband's steady hands guiding her. He had taught her to read silence, to measure distance, to let anger never shake the trigger finger. She had thought those lessons buried with him. Now they rose from her memory as if he stood beside her still. A younger bandit broke from the camp, sprinting toward the horses. Clara raised her rifle, then stopped, shifting instead to a low whistle between her teeth. Her mare answered from the shadows, a sharp neigh that sent the tethered horses into frenzy. They reared and kicked, tangling ropes, scattering saddles, and the boy was thrown hard into the dirt before he could mount. Clara stepped into view then, rifle leveled, the firelight etching her features into a mask of resolve. The outlaws stared, disbelief etched across their faces. A woman stood before them, plain-clothed, eyes steady as stone. A widow. They gaped, caught between fear and insult, until her voice cut through. You thought no one would follow. You thought wrong. The scar-faced leader snarled, teeth bared. You think you can take us? His pistol lifted, but Clara was faster. Her shot tore through his shoulder, spinning him backward, his cry swallowed by the desert. She advanced, each step sure, her rifle reloaded with the ease of long habit. The camp had fallen silent now but for groans and the crackle of fire. The remaining men backed away, the drunken bravado drained from them, leaving only fear. Clara's gaze swept across them, sharp and unwavering. You want to know who I am? She said, voice steady as iron. My husband was Daniel Cartwright. Gunslinger. Lawman. He taught me every trick you see tonight. Men like you put him in the ground before fever finished the job. And my son. Her jaw clenched, grief flickering raw in her eyes. My son died fighting men who thought fear gave them the right to take what they pleased. You're nothing new to me. You're just another story ending the same way. The name landed like a hammer. Some of the older outlaws flinched, the recognition plain in their eyes. Cartwright was a name whispered still, a lawman whose reputation had stretched across counties, a man who'd left scars on more than just his enemies. And now his widow stood before them, the years of silence shattered, her skill no longer hidden. She struck fast. One bandit lunged, desperate, swinging wild. She sidestepped, slamming the butt of her rifle into his jaw, sending him sprawling into the fire's edge. Another charged from the side, but Clara dropped low, rolling into the dust, and when she rose her knife gleamed. The blade caught the man's wrist, spinning his weapon into the dark, and he staggered back clutching the wound, terror spilling from his eyes. The scar-faced leader struggled to his feet, blood soaking his shirt. You'll pay for this, woman, he spat, rage burning even through the pain. Clara raised her rifle again, but this time she did not fire. Instead she advanced slowly, pressing the barrel to his chest. You've already been paid, she said, her voice low and final. Paid in every drop of blood you spilled. Tonight, the debt comes due. His eyes widened, pride faltering into fear. He reached for words, but none came. Clara pulled the trigger. The crack echoed, rolling across the ridge, swallowed by the vast night. When silence fell again, it was thick and absolute. Bodies lay scattered around the camp, broken by a force they had never expected. The fire guttered low, sparks drifting upward like the last remnants of their arrogance. Clara stood alone, her breath steady, her face unreadable in the glow. She reloaded her rifle with deliberate care, though there was no need now. The desert was quiet once more, save for the faint rustle of wind through sage. She turned her gaze skyward, stars burning cold above her. For a long moment she let the weight of what she had done settle deep in her bones. Then she holstered her rifle, gathered her mare, and began walking back through the canyon. Behind her, the gold lay abandoned among the dead, glinting faintly in the embers. It had never been her prize, never her reason. What mattered was the silence left in the wake of laughter, the justice carved into the dust. The desert would remember this night. And so would the people who whispered stories of the widow who rose from grief to hunt down killers, leaving them strewn in the dirt like so many broken promises. A legend had stepped out from the shadows, and the outlaw's reign ended not with a shout, but with the steady hand of a woman no one thought capable. By dawn, the tracks would be covered by wind, the camp reduced to ash. But the tale would travel faster than any horse, carried from town to town, growing in the telling, that a mile beyond the crime, the bandits lay scattered in the dust, felled not by an army, nor by lawmen, but by the widow of Daniel Cartwright, who had chosen at last to let the desert speak through her hands. Morning broke pale and thin, the desert horizon smudged in strokes of gold and gray. The wind moved softly through the canyon, brushing over stones and scattered ashes where the fire had burned low. Clara was already gone. Her tracks led north for a time before vanishing into the wide nothing of the frontier, swallowed by sand and silence. Only the bodies of the outlaws remained, sprawled where their arrogance had left them, their laughter silenced by a widow's hand. Not far behind, the prospector stirred. He had not died in the dust as they expected. His body ached with every shallow breath, but he clung stubbornly to life. When townsfolk finally found him, half-conscious and clinging to the leg of his trembling mule, they carried him to safety. His story spilled slowly from cracked lips, broken by coughs and pauses, yet clear enough to plant wonder in every ear. He told of the ambush, of the boots and fists, of the laughter that crushed him more deeply than the blows. But his voice grew stronger when he spoke of what came after. A woman, plain in dress, with eyes like sharpened steel. He spoke of her silence, of her steady hands binding his wounds, of the fire that glowed in her when she turned her horse toward vengeance. His words painted her not as flesh and blood, but as something drawn from the desert itself, an avenger cloaked in dust and grief. The people listened. Some shook their heads, doubting, while others leaned forward, hearts quickening at the image of a widow hunting down men feared across 3 counties. But when word came from riders who passed the ridge and found the outlaws' camp, their skepticism died. The bandits were there, scattered in the dirt, their stolen gold strewn among them. Not a one had escaped. The tale spread as tales always do, carried by travelers, embroidered in saloons, retold beneath the stars to restless cattle hands and wagon-bound settlers. Each telling added something new, the way she moved like a phantom, the precision of her shots, the unshakable calm in her voice. Some said she was Daniel Cartwright's ghost returned in her widow's skin. Others swore she was vengeance itself, taking form only long enough to balance the scales before dissolving again into the desert. The prospector lived, though he bore the scars of that night for the rest of his days. He never recovered his fortune, for Clara had not lingered to reclaim the gold, and much of it was lost in the wind or pilfered by scavengers who came after. But what he gained instead was a place in the story. He was the witness, the one who survived to say, "Yes, it happened. I saw her. She was real." And when he told it, his voice always trembled between fear and reverence, as though remembering her gaze was enough to steady him still. As for Clara, she did not return to the town, nor to the prospector who owed her his life. She slipped back into the vastness of the frontier, where mountains rose silent and canyons swallowed secrets whole. Some said she went back to her lonely cabin, tending her land in peace as though nothing had changed. Others believed she kept riding, chasing whispers of injustice, a phantom figure who appeared where cruelty had taken root. None could say for certain, and perhaps that was best. Legends do not live in places you can touch. They breathe in uncertainty, in the spaces where truth and myth intertwine. At campfires across the West, when the night grew deep and coyotes howled against the stars, the story was told. Men leaned close to the firelight, faces drawn in shadow, listening as if afraid the widow herself might step out from the dark to stand among them. Children shivered and clutched their blankets, half terrified, half thrilled. The story was not about gold, nor even about vengeance. It was about the strength no one expected, about the quiet fury of a soul stripped bare by loss yet still willing to fight. They never spoke her name, perhaps because names belong to ordinary folk, and she had become something greater than that. She was the widow of the dust, the rider at the ridge, the shadow with the steady hand. Whatever they called her, it always ended the same, that a mile beyond the place where a prospector was robbed of his gold, the bandits who took it lay scattered in the dirt, struck down not by lawmen or armies but by the courage of one who refused to turn away. And so the desert remembered her, even when the wind swept her tracks away. The rocks held the echo of gunfire, the canyons the memory of her silence, and the stars the shape of her unyielding will. She did not stay to be thanked, nor carved her name into stone. She rode on, a solitary figure fading into the horizon, leaving only a story fierce enough to outlive her. That story still burns in the telling, as bright as fire against the night. For in it lives the truth that justice does not always come from the strong or the many. Sometimes it comes from the most unlikely of souls, those scarred by grief, quiet in their sorrow, but carrying within them the steel of resolve. And when the moment calls, they rise, steady and unshaken, to remind the world that cruelty has its end. A mile beyond the robbery, the laughter of outlaws was swallowed by dust. And in its place, a legend was born,